Today, I want to talk to you about something that's not just inspiring, it's biologically transformative. Most people think motivation comes first and then action follows. But neuroscience shows us the opposite is often true. Through deliberate effort, especially effort that feels challenging, we can literally rewire our brain to crave progress, to find pleasure in the process, not just the outcome. There's a molecule called dopamine, often misunderstood as just the reward chemical. But the truth is, dopamine is more powerful when it's tied to the pursuit of effort, not just success. When you learn to associate dopamine with the grind, with pushing through discomfort, you create a feedback loop that trains your brain to love hard work. This isn't just mindset, it's mechanism. And once you understand how to use it, the things that once felt impossible start to feel like fuel. So today, we're not just going to talk about working hard. We're going to talk about how to make your brain fall in love with it. Most people associate rewards with outcomes. You finish a project, you get a sense of relief. You hit a goal, you celebrate. That's the typical cycle we think about. Do the hard thing, get the good feeling. But when we look at the brain and how it actually responds to effort and reward, there's a deeper story, one that completely shifts how we understand motivation, discipline, and even happiness. The brain doesn't just light up when you succeed, it can actually begin to reward you during the work itself if you train it properly. The core of this process revolves around a neurochemical called dopamine. Dopamine isn't just about pleasure, it's about drive. It's what pushes you to seek out, strive, and persist. But here's the catch. Dopamine isn't only released when you achieve a goal, it's released in anticipation of reward. And more importantly, it can be self-generated during effort. That means your brain has the ability to start reinforcing the act of working hard while you're doing it, not just after you've succeeded. This is a profound shift because it means you can start to feel good, not when you're done, but while you're grinding, sweating, and pushing. This is what makes effort neurochemically rewarding. It's not about waiting for external validation or results. It's about tapping into your internal reward system in a way that sustains action and builds resilience. And this isn't just motivational talk, it's hard neuroscience. Studies have shown that when animals and humans are trained to associate effort itself with positive reinforcement, the dopamine system adapts. The brain starts to anticipate that effort will bring about a sense of progress, satisfaction, and even pleasure. That anticipation alone is enough to release dopamine, which then fuels further effort. So how do you train your brain to do this? The key lies in how you mentally frame the work you're doing. When you tell yourself this is the part that matters, this is where I grow, you begin to create a new pattern of association. You begin to signal to your nervous system that the struggle is not something to escape, but something to embrace. Over time, this reframing creates actual changes in your brain circuitry. Neurons that fire together wire together, and as you repeatedly link effort with positive internal states, your brain learns effort is good. Effort feels meaningful. Effort is part of who I am. And this is where intrinsic motivation starts to form. If you rely only on external goals, money, titles, approval, you'll burn out or become dependent on things you can't control. But when your brain learns to generate dopamine internally during effort, you build a self-sustaining loop. You begin to work hard not because you have to, but because you want to, because it feels aligned with your purpose and identity. You don't dread the process, you lean into it. Now, this doesn't mean the work stops being hard, but it means the meaning you assign to difficulty changes. Instead of interpreting physical strain or mental fatigue as a negative, you interpret it as a signal that something good is happening, that you're building capacity, that you're pushing thresholds. That kind of mindset doesn't just make you tougher, it makes your brain literally more efficient at handling stress and challenge. There's also a biological feedback loop at play. Dopamine released during effort improves focus, enhances energy, and lowers the perceived cost of work. That is, it reduces how hard the work feels. When you're in this loop, you can work longer and more intensely with less mental resistance. And the more often you access this state, the more robust those neural pathways become. Over time, the brain begins to default to this mode. Work becomes less about forcing yourself and more about flowing into a deep state of engagement, even in the face of difficulty. What's crucial to understand is that this process is trainable. Your brain is plastic, meaning it adapts based on experience. If you consistently reinforce the link between effort and reward, your dopamine system recalibrates. This is why elite performers across disciplines, athletes, scientists, creatives often describe a love for the grind. They've trained their brains, whether consciously or not, to release dopamine not just when they win, but when they strive. This ability to extract internal reward from the process is what separates short bursts of motivation from long-term discipline. Motivation is about feeling good enough to start, but discipline, the ability to show up consistently, especially when it's hard, that comes from this rewiring. It comes from making effort itself feel like a form of progress, and once your brain experiences this, it begins to crave the very thing most people try to avoid: hard work. Dopamine is often misunderstood as the chemical of pleasure or reward, something that only floods the brain when we accomplish something meaningful, a win, a compliment, a paycheck, or a trophy. But that's a simplified view of how dopamine really works. In truth, dopamine is much more about pursuit than it is about the prize. It's not just released when you succeed, it's released in anticipation of success, and sometimes in even greater quantities during the process of striving than at the moment of arrival. This single insight, grounded in neuroscience, shifts how we should think about effort, goal setting, and motivation. When researchers look at the brain's reward system, they find that the largest spikes in dopamine don't necessarily occur when a person receives the reward they've been chasing. Instead, they often occur in the moments leading up to the achievement, during the process, the striving, the effort. The climb, not the summit, is where the brain becomes most chemically engaged. And that's not just poetic, it's biological. The reason this matters is because it means the experience of progress and the pursuit of a meaningful outcome can be more neurologically satisfying than the outcome itself. This is incredibly important for behavior change and performance. If we mistakenly chase only the final reward, we risk losing motivation once we get it, or worse, we fail to develop the systems that sustain our drive over the long term. But when you understand that dopamine peaks during pursuit, you can begin to anchor your sense of meaning and motivation in the work itself. You start to value the journey not as a cliché, but as a neurochemical reality. Your brain is built to reward you while you're striving if you learn to recognize and tap into that system. This insight has been repeatedly demonstrated in both animal and human studies. Rats pressing a lever for food, for example, will show a rise in dopamine not when the food arrives, but when they anticipate that pressing the lever will lead to food. The same applies to humans. Anticipation, not arrival, is the key driver of sustained motivation. That's why people often feel a surge of energy as they near a goal, or why imagining future success can be so powerful. It's because the brain is releasing dopamine in expectation of what's to come. The actual reward might feel flat compared to the energetic high of striving toward it. In practical terms, this means you can use dopamine as a tool for engagement and performance by structuring your life around pursuit rather than outcome. When you break a large goal into smaller, actionable steps and allow yourself to feel a sense of achievement after completing each one, your brain learns to associate the process itself with reward. Each time you make progress, no matter how small, the dopamine system reinforces that behavior, making you more likely to return to the task with enthusiasm and focus. Over time, this shapes how you approach challenges. Instead of only working hard for the payoff, you begin to enjoy the act of progressing, the daily repetitions, the unseen labor. There's also a functional advantage to this. Dopamine not only boosts motivation, it enhances attention, energy, and learning. When released during the pursuit of a goal, it sharpens your cognitive and physical capacities. Your brain becomes more efficient at solving problems, and your body feels more prepared to act. This neurochemical state is what athletes often refer to as being in the zone, a condition where effort feels exhilarating rather than exhausting. It's not magic, it's biology, and it happens when your dopamine system is engaged during effort, not just when you're reaping rewards. This understanding also explains why people often experience a dip after achieving something significant. The moment the goal is met, the dopamine levels drop. Without a new target, a new challenge, the brain can experience a kind of post-goal crash. That's why high performers are usually quick to set the next objective, not out of restlessness, but because they know that the feeling of purpose and engagement comes from the chase. They're not addicted to winning, they're addicted to striving, and their brains are tuned accordingly. Crucially, you can train your brain to function this way too. When you consciously shift your mindset from focusing on rewards to focusing on progress, you condition your neural pathways to release dopamine more frequently and sustainably. Instead of waiting for a big win to feel good, you begin to feel good about showing up, pushing forward, and improving incrementally. That's a more stable form of motivation, one that doesn't depend on external circumstances or outcomes. It's internal, self-generated, and adaptable to nearly any challenge you set your mind to. The human brain is not static. It is designed to change, adapt, and rewire itself in response to experience. This ability, known as neuroplasticity, means that every time we engage in focused effort, especially under challenging conditions, we are actively shaping the architecture of our brain. Hard work, especially the kind that pushes us beyond our comfort zone, is not just a test of willpower or motivation. It is a neurological training session that builds circuits of resilience, focus, and grit. The more we expose ourselves to this kind of effort, the more we develop the neural pathways that support high performance and long-term mental toughness. Resilience is not something you're simply born with. It is constructed effort by effort within the circuitry of the brain. When you choose to work through discomfort rather than avoid it, when you lean into stress in a controlled and deliberate way, you activate brain regions involved in cognitive control, emotional regulation, and goal-directed behavior. These regions, primarily the prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, grow stronger with repeated use, just like a muscle. And just as physical training improves muscular endurance, repeated mental challenges improve your brain's ability to stay focused under pressure, manage emotional reactivity, and persist in the face of setbacks. This is one of the key differences between people who consistently overcome obstacles and those who fold under stress. It's not just about attitude or mindset, though those matter. It's about what's been built in the brain through repeated experience. When you consistently engage in hard work, especially in the absence of immediate reward, you are reinforcing a set of neural patterns that make it easier to persist the next time you face a challenge. This is why effort is never wasted. Even if the outcome doesn't go your way, the neurological training that occurred during the process stays with you. The brain remembers how to push, how to focus, how to adapt. Over time, this accumulation of effort changes your baseline response to difficulty. Tasks that once seemed overwhelming start to feel manageable. Stress that used to derail your focus begins to feel familiar, even energizing. This happens because your brain has become conditioned to interpret effort not as a threat, but as a signal for growth. The more frequently you enter this state, the more efficient your brain becomes at navigating it. What once triggered anxiety now triggers alertness and engagement. This is not about ignoring discomfort, but about using it as a tool for neurobiological adaptation. Research shows that individuals who regularly engage in effortful tasks, whether physical, cognitive, or emotional, show greater activation in the neural networks responsible for persistence and motivation. These networks become more interconnected, allowing for faster communication between regions involved in decision-making, focus, and emotional regulation. The result is a brain that can handle complexity and adversity with greater ease. Importantly, this doesn't mean the brain feels less, it means the brain responds more intelligently. It becomes better at regulating the internal environment so that you can perform even when conditions are far from ideal. The process of building these neural circuits is not always comfortable. In fact, it often feels quite the opposite. That's the point. The difficulty is the signal. Each time you push through resistance, whether it's physical fatigue, mental boredom, or emotional doubt, you are sending a message to your nervous system. This is what we do. This is how we respond. That message gets encoded in your neural pathways and becomes part of your default wiring. The next time you're in a similar situation, your brain recalls that history and activates those same circuits with more efficiency and less hesitation. This is how discipline is built at a biological level. Not through willpower alone, but through the repeated practice of facing challenge and moving forward anyway. Every rep, every set, every minute spent problem solving, writing, studying, or staying present in an uncomfortable conversation, it all counts. It all feeds into a cumulative effect where your brain becomes a more capable, resilient version of itself. This is especially true when the effort is voluntary. When you choose to push yourself, you activate neuromodulators like norepinephrine and dopamine that tag the experience as important and worthy of adaptation. This strengthens the long-term imprint of the experience and accelerates neural change. Even more, the circuits built through hard work tend to generalize. That means the resilience you develop while training for a marathon can translate into greater patience in a professional setting. The focus you develop while learning a difficult skill can carry over into your personal relationships. This transfer happens because the core neural mechanisms for handling stress, sustaining effort, and recovering from failure are shared across domains. Once those systems are strengthened in one area, they're available to be deployed elsewhere. Hard work then becomes not just about achieving a goal, but about expanding your internal capacity across all areas of life. The way you mentally frame a challenge plays a critical role in how your brain responds to it. Struggle by default is something most people want to avoid. It feels uncomfortable, uncertain, and taxing. But from a neuroscience perspective, struggle is one of the most potent triggers for plasticity, the brain's ability to change and grow. When you interpret struggle as failure or punishment, you activate stress responses that narrow focus, increase anxiety, and reduce learning. But when you frame that same struggle as a signal for growth, the brain enters a very different state, one that is optimized for adaptation, persistence, and long-term improvement. This framing process isn't just motivational, it's mechanical. The brain is constantly taking cues from your internal dialogue to determine what kind of situation it's in. If you view a tough workout as suffering, your body and mind start to shut down faster. But if you view that same workout as an opportunity to become stronger, your physiology shifts. You produce different patterns of neuromodulators like dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin that enhance resilience and drive. You start to perceive effort not as something being taken from you, but as something being added to you. The experience feels different, even though the external conditions are the same. This principle holds across any domain: academic, athletic, creative, professional. When you approach a setback with the belief that it's evidence of incompetence or lack of talent, your brain essentially goes into a protective state. It pulls back. It starts conserving energy and avoiding risk. But if you see that same setback as part of the training process, as a necessary component of developing mastery, your brain engages. It leans in. It releases the very chemicals that support sustained effort and sharpened attention. This shift in framing activates the same circuits involved in curiosity, learning, and motivation. That's the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth-oriented mindset, not just in philosophy but in biology. When you adopt the belief that your abilities can grow through effort, your brain opens up to that possibility and begins working in your favor. You're more likely to take on difficult tasks, and more importantly, you're more likely to stay with them long enough to see improvement. The neuroplasticity required to build new skills or habits doesn't happen in moments of ease. It happens in the presence of friction, of errors, of repeated effort under stress. The people who grow the most are not the ones who avoid this process, but the ones who interpret it as essential. This mental framing doesn't have to be extreme or delusional. You don't need to love pain or pretend struggle is easy. You just need to recognize it as useful. For example, during a difficult task, you can tell yourself, "This is where the work counts." That single phrase can change your emotional and physiological response. Your brain starts to associate difficulty with importance. Over time, that creates a feedback loop where you begin to seek out challenges not because they're pleasant, but because you've trained yourself to understand their value. That understanding becomes embedded in your identity. You start to see yourself as someone who grows through adversity, and your brain conforms to that self-image. Cognitive reframing is a tool that can be developed and refined. It's not about lying to yourself or sugarcoating hard realities. It's about choosing the most biologically useful lens through which to view a situation. If you can train yourself to see effort and mistakes as data rather than defeat, your brain will become more responsive to those experiences. You'll extract more learning from each attempt, and your nervous system will adapt more quickly. This isn't just theoretical, it's observable in brain scans, behavioral studies, and performance outcomes. When a person reframes a challenge as a chance to improve, their body's stress response actually becomes more efficient. Instead of chronic cortisol release, which can damage tissues and impair focus, they get short bursts of stress chemicals that prime the brain and body for action. Heart rate variability improves, suggesting better control over the autonomic nervous system. Prefrontal cortex activity increases, supporting better decision-making and emotional regulation. All of this happens because of a simple shift in interpretation, one that turns adversity into training rather than trauma. This is also why elite performers often use mental scripts during their most difficult moments. They don't deny the difficulty, they redefine it. Whether it's a Navy SEAL in freezing water or an entrepreneur facing a financial collapse, the inner narrative becomes something like, "This is making me stronger," or "This is the test that prepares me." That script becomes a lever, pulling the brain into a mode of growth instead of shutdown. Over time, these scripts get automated. The framing becomes second nature. What once felt like suffering starts to feel like sculpting. What once seemed like resistance becomes raw material for strength. Every time you frame a challenge as growth, you reinforce a set of neural connections that support that frame. The brain learns that struggle is not just survivable, it's desirable. This doesn't make hard work easy, but it makes it meaningful. And meaning is the fuel that sustains long-term effort far better than any external reward. The human brain is built to adapt to what it experiences repeatedly. When you engage in a behavior consistently over time, your brain begins to rewire itself to support that behavior. This process of long-term adaptation is how habits are formed, how skills are built, and how identity is shaped. In the context of hard work and mental toughness, consistency is not just a strategy, it is the foundation for change at a neural level. Every time you show up, even when motivation is low or conditions aren't ideal, you are reinforcing a set of neural circuits that become stronger, more efficient, and more automatic with repetition. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, is governed by both intensity and repetition. While intense, emotionally charged experiences can certainly create rapid changes in brain function, those changes often fade without reinforcement. What produces stable, lasting change is repetition over time. When you consistently engage in focused effort, especially when you maintain that effort in the absence of external rewards, you are effectively signaling to your brain this matters. That repeated signal leads to structural and functional changes in the nervous system, strengthening the pathways involved in attention, motivation, and action. This is why consistency is more powerful than bursts of inspiration. A single day of extraordinary effort might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely leads to meaningful change if it's not followed by repeated engagement. On the other hand, modest effort applied regularly leads to compounding effects in the brain. Just like in physical training, where repeated exposure to resistance builds strength, repeated mental effort builds cognitive endurance. The circuits you activate daily, whether in writing, training, problem solving, or learning, begin to fire with less resistance, greater speed, and improved synchronization over time. Each time you repeat a task, your brain becomes better at predicting what's coming. This allows it to use fewer resources for the same output. That efficiency is a hallmark of long-term adaptation. Neural pathways that were once slow and effortful become automatic. Tasks that once required conscious effort become more fluid, almost reflexive. This frees up cognitive energy for higher-level functions like creativity, strategy, and innovation. But that automaticity only emerges after sufficient repetition. You can't skip the stage of conscious, sometimes frustrating effort that precedes it. There is also a biochemical aspect to consistency. When you repeatedly engage in effortful tasks, your brain's reward system begins to respond more reliably. Dopamine, the neuromodulator responsible for motivation and drive, becomes associated not just with results, but with the act of showing up. This internal shift changes your relationship to work. You begin to crave the structure, the routine, the process itself, not because it's always enjoyable, but because your brain has adapted to find meaning and reward in it. That's when discipline stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like identity. This is particularly important in the face of boredom or monotony, which are inevitable when pursuing long-term goals. Many people give up not because they can't handle stress, but because they can't handle repetition without novelty. But the brain can be trained to push through that plateau. When you persist through boredom, you activate neural mechanisms of persistence that are crucial for mastery. These mechanisms are most engaged not when everything is new and exciting, but when it's familiar and you still choose to show up. That's where real mental toughness is built, not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet ones that nobody sees. Consistency also creates psychological safety within the brain. When you repeatedly face challenge and overcome it, even in small ways, your nervous system learns that discomfort is survivable. This reduces the fear response in future efforts, making it easier to take risks, confront failure, and maintain composure under stress. You train your body and mind to regulate arousal, stay calm under pressure, and operate effectively even when emotions are elevated. This self-regulation is a byproduct of consistency. It's not learned in theory, but developed through experience. In addition, consistent effort wires the brain for delayed gratification. Each time you choose to work without an immediate payoff, you strengthen the connection between present actions and future outcomes. This ability to hold effort in the present for reward in the future is one of the most important traits linked to success in any field. It allows you to build momentum, tolerate setbacks, and keep going when progress is invisible. Over time, the repeated experience of effort leading to reward, even if delayed, teaches the brain to trust the process. The cumulative effect of consistency is that your baseline changes. What was once difficult becomes normal. What once required motivation becomes automatic. You are not just improving your performance, you are altering the kind of person your brain believes you are. You're training your nervous system to default to persistence, to see effort as routine, to view hard work not as something extraordinary but as something expected. This identity shift is one of the most powerful outcomes of consistency because it changes how you approach everything. The discipline to act day after day, regardless of emotion, becomes embedded in the wiring of your brain. There is a profound connection between physical effort and mental strength, and it is deeply rooted in the way the brain and body communicate. When you engage in physical exertion, particularly when it is deliberate, strenuous, and sustained, you activate multiple systems within the body that converge on the brain and influence how you think, feel, and act. Hard physical work, whether in the form of training, sport, labor, or endurance, does more than build muscle or improve cardiovascular health. It becomes a neurological training ground for mental resilience, emotional regulation, and cognitive sharpness. The brain monitors the body through a network of signals from muscles, organs, and the autonomic nervous system. During intense physical effort, especially when it's voluntary and goal-directed, these signals create a kind of feedback loop that challenges the brain's stress systems while also training them. You learn to breathe through discomfort, to stay calm under strain, to manage fatigue, and to maintain focus when your body wants to stop. Each of these moments teaches your nervous system how to handle pressure not just physically but psychologically. You become better at staying composed, centered, and deliberate when faced with challenges that would normally trigger panic or withdrawal. Physical stress, when approached with intention, conditions the same systems that regulate psychological stress. The heart rate increases, the breath quickens, the body heats up, yet if you maintain control of your mind through that, you are practicing emotional regulation in real time. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for decision-making and impulse control, is forced to work in coordination with the amygdala and other limbic regions that process threat and emotion. That neural